The response to Hurricane Katrina continues. There seems to be near universal agreement among politicians and the press alike that there was a major failure by the federal government. How much responsibility belongs there and how much may belong elsewhere? Fox News correspondent Major Garrett has some questions and some answers.
Left behind in Katrina's wake, death, destruction, and a raft of nagging questions. Did New Orleans and federal officials know how dangerous Katrina could be? Yes. Warnings Saturday from the National Hurricane Center prompted a federal state of emergency declaration and preliminary evacuation orders. Did New Orleans assume lead authority for dealing with Katrina? Yes. The city's Office of Emergency Preparedness says it's the first line of defense. We coordinate all city department and allied state and federal agencies which respond to citywide disasters and emergencies through the development and constant updating of an integrated multi-hazard plan. All requests for federal disaster assistance and federal funding subsequent to disaster declarations are also made through this office. When did New Orleans officials tell residents to evacuate? Mayor Ray Nagin issued a voluntary evacuation order at 5 p.m. Saturday. When did Nagin issue the mandatory evacuation order? Sunday morning. Why the delay? Nagin said he needed to research his legal authority. But the city's emergency guide outlines procedures for a mandatory evacuation, suggesting Nagin had the authority or, at minimum, the city contemplated its use. Did Democratic Governor Kathleen Blanco hesitate when offered federal military aid? Nagin suggested she did in a Friday meeting with President Bush. There were two options to the governor, Nagin says now. I was ready to move today. The governor said she needed 24 hours to make a decision.
George Bush doesn't care about black people. Equivocally, that I feel race was a factor.
Colonel David Hunt, Fox News military analyst, he's up in Boston. We asked him to find out exactly why the National Guard didn't get there for better than 4 days. And what did you find out, Colonel?
There was pre-positioned gear, water, and food. Problem is the governor would not pull the trigger immediately to send them forward, and they didn't have a right enough of satellite telephones or helicopters or vehicles that could go over water. And they would not, and so there was no communications between the governor's office and things like the great police chief you just talked to. So they never got the information. They had to put reconnaissance teams in early, as was the plan. They didn't do it. They got caught and then would not make a decision. Couple that with lack of federalizing troops, and you have a disaster.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
You know, it did not take very long for the blame game to start with Hurricane Katrina. It's an act of God, but the finger pointing going all the way up to the President Bush. Herman Cain, too soon for this?
Yes.
What do you make of the fact that it just continues?
Well, the political blame game is a waste of time. We are dealing with real human tragedy here, one of the biggest tragedies that this country has ever faced. The breakdown wasn't with President Bush, in my opinion. It was a crisis of leadership, or the lack thereof, of people not knowing how to lead in a crisis situation.
George Bush doesn't care about black people. Equivocally, that I feel race was a factor.
These two, survivors of a riot at the Superdome.
It was the place we went to get out of the storm.
Their friend was beaten to death.
Well, Jim Rogers, you've been arguing as someone from this area that the levees have always been a problem and always been a corrupt source of issue for politicians there.
Neil, none of this had to happen. Most of this did not have to happen. Those levees have been there. The levee board in New Orleans in the past 10 years has bought a casino, a private marina, a private plane. They have several $100 million invested with their friends, but they have not taken care of the levees. If somebody had protected those levees, New Orleans would not have flooded. So this is caused by local politicians, and they should all resign. They're screaming at the president. They should be resigning. They brought it on themselves.